I guess you're not used to seeing us in normal clothes. We're always in work clothes nowadays and we're out working in the barn. But today we're here in our living room because we wanted to answer some of the questions that we gotten lately.
Yeah.
So let's start with a question about the lamination, which was the last big job that we did in the boat build.
So we've been getting some questions about the final hull thickness, how thick the cross-section of the hull is going to be once the hull is finished. And right now we have the cedar core, and that's 28 millimeters thick. And then on the outside, on the top sides, we have another 4 millimeters of glass, and that's roughly, you have 4 layers of the biax 600 gram fiberglass cloth, and then the twill weave on top of that, and that's roughly 4 millimeters. And then in the bottom section of the hull we have 8 layers, so roughly 7 to 8 millimeters of glass in that section. And then on the inside of the hull we will have 3 millimeters on the sides and around 5 to 6 millimeter in the bottom section. And then we have the keel area where we will have solid glass, no wood core. And in that area we will have somewhere between 20 to 30 millimeters of solid glass where the keel connects to the hull. So that means that the total thickness of the hull in the top sides will be roughly 35 millimeters, something like that. And then we have the bottom section where we have extra glass, and there it will be roughly 42 millimeters.
And this is a strong.
It's a strong hull.
Strong hull.
It will be very stiff. And then we have the bow section where we have added a little bit extra amount of glass. Roughly,
quite a lot.
Yeah, quite a lot. Roughly 10 layers of 600 gram mat on the outside, and we will have an equal amount on the inside. But then in between we have a quite massive stem of oak, which is roughly 250 millimeters thick, something like this. And then cedar on top of that, and then glass on the both sides. Okay. So the bow section is really strong. Some of you guys have wondered if we're going to add some Kevlar in the bow area, and we're not. And if we would have done that, the best place to put Kevlar is in the inside of the hull. So we could still do that, but I highly doubt that we need it with that massive stem that we have there of the oak.
So will you feel confident going in places that might have ice later when the boat is finished to sail?
I mean, ice, you should never hit ice, especially not. I mean, the difference between a steel hull and something like this is that, of course, steel has a higher impact resistance. Like if you hit ice like that. This hull is equally as strong, stiff-wise, the movements in the hull. But when it comes to, breaking ice, steel will of course be stronger because it has a higher impact resistance. But with the oak we have in the bow, it will still be a very strong bow, but I wouldn't,
we never want to hit
ice
or something super hard, but at least we will feel pretty confident going, like if we would run aground sometime or bump into something.
Yeah, bump into a log or something floating in the water. I'm really confident that the hull will be really strong. But that's a big difference from breaking ice with the boat, because then you will of course scratch. You will scratch the fiberglass, and that's not so good.
So it won't be an icebreaker, but it's going to be a pretty strong boat or hull, and especially bow.
Yeah.
So we're quite pleased with that.
Yeah, definitely. And that leads us into another question that we've been getting about the layers of fiberglass that we have added to the hull. As you have seen in the videos, we have added the layers from the bottom of the hull down the sides.
And vertically.
Yeah. And some of you have asked why we haven't applied the fiberglass the other way, lengthwise on the hull.
And if that will have an impact, or...
Yeah, if that would have been stronger to add the fiberglass in that direction. But the fiberglass on the hull is mostly there for the torsional stiffness of the hull. Lengthwise, we still have all that cedar, which provides a lot of stiffness to the hull with all those planks in the lengthwise direction. So the glass is there to help the cedar with the torsional stiffness of the hull. So that's why we have that X pattern, 45 plus minus 45 degrees of the strands in the fiberglass. So that's why when we add the fiberglass in that direction, we get an X. We have the length of the hull, and then we have the X like that with fiberglass tying the hull together, so we get that torsional stiffness. With that said, even if the strands are in that direction, it still adds a lot to the lengthwise stiffness of the hull, because you have some strands going in that direction since it's in an X. You could, of course, add unidirectional cloth to the hull in the lengthwise direction to add more stiffness, but there's no need for that since the hull is going to be plenty stiff and strong the way it is right now.
On the latest episode, we also got some questions about the stern. You haven't laminated the stern yet.
No.
And that's true. And it was good that we had one follower who were kind to answer on these comments, telling them that will be built later on in the building process. And that's completely right, because we will have a lot of benefits from keeping the stern open. It will give us a good access going in and out of the boat. And we haven't yet decided when in the boat build we're going to build the stern, but at least I don't think this year.
No, because as you can imagine, building the interior of the boat, there's going to be many times that we need to walk in and out of the boat with stuff, carrying material and tools and everything. And every time, if we would have had the stern in place, climbing over that every time with all the stuff would add a lot of extra time, and it would have been more complicated. So what we're thinking now is to build like a small platform behind the boat, so we can walk straight in from the
that opening that we have. We have like an opening in the middle of the barn.
Yeah, into the stable, so we can like walk from the floor area in the stable. So that will be like a small workshop, so we can work at the same level going into the hull.
We still have to, then laminate the stern. But what we've been talking about, we're finished with the lamination, we're finished to the degree that we can, flip the boat over, flip the hull over. So that's what we're meaning with when we're saying that.
Yeah. So probably we're going to start building the interior of the boat in the bow section and then moving aft. So we can close off the stern once we start building the cockpit, really. Yeah, we're getting closer to turning the hull. We still don't know exactly when that is going to happen. We have a lot of fairing to do, and we also need to sand the hull and put on some primer paint on the hull.
And build the hull stands.
Yeah, like a cradle that you can put the hull in once it's flipped over.
Two cradles.
Yeah, and those needs to be pretty sturdy since the boat is going to sit in those for quite some time.
But our plan is to flip the hull over in March or April.
Yeah.
So it's not too far.
No, that's the plan right now, and but a lot depends on how much time we will have to spend on longboarding and fairing the hull, and we have started on that, and it feels okay. The hull feels like it's pretty fair as it is. I'm happy that we spend a lot of time placing out those temporary frames so we have the correct lines on the hull. And of course we have introduced some unevenness in the hull, but that's mostly from the fiberglass that we have added on top of the cedar. So when we can turn the hull exactly will depend a lot on how much time we'll have to spend with the torture boards. And turning the hull over leads us into another question that we got, and that's about the temporary frames, the plywood frames that we have inside the hull right now. And how hard it will be to remove those once the hull is turned over.
Yeah, since we now have fiberglass on top of the cedar and the screws.
Yeah, I mean, all the screws that we had through the cedar planks into the plywood temporary frames, they are removed. We removed those before we started with the fiberglass on the outside of the hull. So right now the hull is more or less hanging on top of those temporary frames. There's really no screws holding them in place. I have put screws along the shear line from the inside going into the cedar just to keep it snug and keep the form of the shape of the hull during the fiberglassing process. And then in the stern we still have one temporary frames where we have screws in place for the whole section of the hull, because that's aft of the area where we have placed fiberglass. But once the hull is turned over, in theory it should be pretty easy to remove this these temporary frames, because we have put some type of tape on top of them. So even if we have squeeze out of epoxy from between the cedar planks touching the plywood.
It shouldn't touch.
No, it shouldn't touch the plywood.
Because it's then touching the
tape.
The tape.
And the epoxy doesn't stick to that tape. But all of this is in theory, and I bet in places there will be areas where, you know, a screw hole has brought some epoxy with it through that tape and into the plywood, so making it stick a bit more. But
it's going to be interesting to do.
It's going to bring interesting.
And we're not going to bring them down all at once.
No.
It's going to be one at a time, because we have to replace it with then
permanent bulkheads.
Yeah. Like the walls that would be inside of the boat.
Yeah.
So, but which one do you think we're going to start with removing?
I don't know. I mean, there's going to be a lot of thinking about that once the hull is the right side up.
They are open, so we can walk through.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to be able to walk through them.
But it's going to be pretty difficult to work in there. If, you know, having them in place. So I'm thinking maybe we remove a few of them so we can build a permanent bulkhead. And once that is in place, we can remove some more, build another bulkhead. Because what we don't want to do is just to remove all of them, because we're running the risk that the shape of the hull falls out a little bit if we don't have any deck beams in place and no bulkheads. So
or the glass neither.
Yeah, but we can't put fiberglass on the inside of the hull before we have removed, or we could do it in sections. But I'm thinking that we need some deck beams or some bulkheads in place before we can remove all of the temporary frames. So that's the plan, how it looks right now. And hopefully it will not be too hard to remove those. And then I have another question, and this one is pretty long, so that's why I'm reading from the phone. If there's any lesson learned from the lamination process of the boat, any air bubbles which needs treatment afterwards, and if the cloth choice, the 600 gram biaxial cloth, if that was the best choice also in hindsight. Yeah, I mean,
lessons learned.
Lessons learned. I think the biggest lesson learned was that the way we started off laminating the hull with Malin's family helping us, that was not the correct way to do this, especially with that pretty thick cloth, 600 gram.
And to saturate it in place.
Yeah, because it was really hard to do that, crawling around on the hull.
It was stressful.
Yeah, and stressful.
And tough, really tough. But that was a lesson that we learned quickly.
Yeah, it was.
Which was very good.
Yeah, it was really good. Because the biggest problem with that was, besides the crawling around bit, was that we had to keep the epoxy in trays. And we all know epoxy in trays or in buckets kicks off a lot faster than when it's spread out in a thin layer on the hull. And so that meant that it was really stressful to get the epoxy out of the tray as fast as possible, and that wasn't.
And made it harder too, because
Yeah.
you could kind of feel or tell that the epoxy started to
Become thicker,
yeah. And
pretty
which
fast.
made it even harder then to saturate
Yeah.
the cloths.
So-
So I remember we were gonna, yeah, I think we were on our way to pick up Vera then after this crazy weekend. And we were talking about like how we're gonna do this, how we're
Yeah.
gonna manage just us two, and how long is this gonna take? And it's so hard. We're gonna like wear ourselves out totally. We're gonna be
Yeah, it felt pretty bad.
and then you just said like, yeah, but I saw this other method. I saw someone doing it when they used a table and they saturated the cloth on the table.
Yeah.
And then they just laid it out on the hull. And I was like, oh, okay, how would that work? Would that be possible? Where could we have a table? Where could we build it?
Yeah. So that was really lucky that I saw that. It was actually a guy that contacted us on Facebook from Turkey, and he's also building his own boat.
The same way.
The same way.
Hull as we have.
And I had checked some of his pictures on his Facebook page about this boat build, and I saw in one picture that he was using a roll to roll up the saturated cloth like that. So I wrote him a short message just asking, how is that working out for you? And he said, yeah, it's quite okay, especially if you have a heavy cloth like we did. So I'm really lucky that
Or glad you're
yeah, I'm really glad and lucky that I saw that picture,
Yeah.
and I wrote him a message and asked
Yeah, so that was one lesson learned, that we had to
Yeah.
change
the method.
the method that we were saturating the cloths and
Yeah.
the way we were laminating really. Are there any other lessons learned?
Mm,
Of course, during the time we've, realized which type of rollers are the best,
Yeah.
which one we use the most, which ones that are the easiest.
yeah.
I don't know. There's super many lessons learned, really. Like,
Yeah.
Small details, making it more efficient, the work,
Yeah.
making us not that, not too, how do you say?
Sticky with epoxy everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Keeping it more tidy.
but the big things is that table, and I mean, in hindsight, we could actually have been using even heavier cloth to maybe cut down one less layer. So instead of putting on 4 layers, we could have done it in 3 layers. I don't know. Of course, there's benefits of using more layers as well. Some say you get a stronger laminate from more layers, but potentially you could save some time on having an even heavier cloth, because that wouldn't have been a problem with the saturation table. So then we could have, but
who knows?
Yeah, who knows? And
I mean, it went so much faster now using the saturation table than before. So, yeah, and as you also said in a previous episode, like it wasn't you thought it would be harder than it was.
And yeah, and I also have been saying this before. It felt pretty daunting before we started out, and especially after that first session we had with your family. I was
and
like,
also when we were alone.
Yeah.
The same, because we tried it out first, just us,
Because
and we were like so tired
and you just saw this massive hull in front of you. How are we going to make this possible in a reasonable amount of time?
And maybe you think that, we could have asked other people and have other people help us, but that was the thing also, that it takes quite a lot of time to teach someone else to do this, and when you don't have any experience, never done it before, so it actually just made it easier doing it us two, because we knew how to do it, we knew how to work together, so we just decided to now when we have a saturation table, let's go, we do it, just us two, and it worked well.
Yeah, then we have a question if we had any problems with air bubbles forming under the laminate. And in the beginning, we had some problems with that. Could be that we came back after lunch and then you saw a small air bubble that had formed and you had to roll that out. But that was before we started to work in an environment where the temp was going down. In the beginning, we started the day off by just turning on the heater and then starting to work. And then, of course, the temp went higher and higher during the working day. And then air trapped in the cedar, those small air bubbles, they also got bigger when because of the temperature, they expand. But once we figured out that it was much better to heat the barn up a lot in the morning before we started work, and then turn the thermostat down 1 degree per every length of fiberglass that we put onto the hull. Once we started using that method instead, we didn't have any problem with air bubbles any longer, because then there was no chance for air bubbles to expand behind the fiberglass. So much better, and that was a really good lesson that we learned.
Doing these big jobs that we've done for the last year, working on the hull, you're constantly like evaluating what you're doing, the way we're doing it, and how we can improve.
Yeah.
Both in time efficiency, in cost efficiency, and of course just to improve the way we do it, the quality of the work.
Yeah.
So it's all the time, okay, what about the temperature? What about the material that we're using?
Yeah, the type of rollers.
Yeah.
And
There's so many different parts.
Yeah.
So it's a ongoing part of the build as well, of the process of just doing that, and it's good to have someone to talk
yes.
about it with. Just brainstorming, and is there something we can improve there, or no, it's good like it is. We have to wait and see.
Because building a boat like this, everything is pretty big. I mean, the surface area of the hull, I said it many times, is massive. It's 100 square meters. So of course, everything you can improve your workflow with will help you a lot. Even small things that you improve adds up when you have big areas that you need to do it on. If it's sanding the hull, find a more efficient way to do that, or later on, once the hull is flipped, coming out and into the boat more easily and faster. Those small things to streamline the whole build flow, that really helps.
Let's end the video with talking about how do we like living this lifestyle now. We're on land, we are building a boat, we have more of a work, Monday to Friday type of work, being, self-employed. So it's not just Monday to Friday. But, anyway, we are used to living the life on water, living on a boat, having that freedom of and excitement of, well, where's the next place we're gonna go to. And it's the second winter that we spend here, and it's definitely much harder than last winter. It's more, last winter was like the first winter in some time, and it was new being back on land. But now this winter is much harder.
Yeah, more snow.
Yeah, and just,
colder.
So many months of dark skies, not much sun, many storms, bad weather. So for me, I definitely miss boat life a lot, cruising life. There are many good things about this life too.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, but yeah, it's so special, cruising life.
Yeah, sure.
What do you think?
No, I mean, especially now in the winter time, it's quite easily to wander off in your thoughts. Oh, I could have been in French Polynesia now, in some anchorage with round 2. But life happens, and I really like the process that we're in right now, building our future home and boat.
It's very different. I think we can say from what we've done before.
Yeah.
We've never. I don't think many people have taken on a project this big, and then we are fortunate to treat it as a full-time work, since we film this and document the whole build, and we can do it how much we want.
Yeah.
So that makes it, of course, the process shorter, but it's still so big and a lot of work in a way that we haven't worked before.
No, not like this. I mean, it's a test for sure, building your own boat like this. It's I really understand people that say that, oh, you shouldn't, go down that path, building your own boat, because it is a massive project.
And then adding,
like this.
Yeah, and on top of that, adding documenting it all.
Yes.
Explaining what you're doing for someone else who's watching, trying to make that interesting and understandable as well. Yeah. That adds like at least a 20% of the workload of how much time it takes, everything.
And then in different phases of the build, like the ones we've been in now, laminating the hull, planking the hull, all of those phases are really long and much of the same. And that's another aspect of making videos about it.
In real time.
In real time, that it's not always easy to get those videos to be interesting, because another week of laminating the hull.
Yeah, or maybe it's not the challenge of making them interesting, but it's a challenge of, we can show like, oh, this much has happened since last episode. Wow. Because it's in real time that we're documenting, and so we're thinking about that. We're getting some comments sometimes like, oh, it's another video about planking, it's another video about laminating. We totally get that, but this is our journey. We started building and documenting the build at the same time. So if you see on the positive side, you're actually following a boat build, step by step as it's being done, with all the lessons learned and new ways of doing it and changing our minds.
Yeah. So. And of course, I think, and I really hope that this will change a little bit moving forward, because I said this before, the project will be becoming smaller and smaller once we progress in the boat build, because these massive, really long phases of the build are really now in the beginning with the hull. Later on, once we start with the interior, it will be smaller projects, and you will see I think it will be easier for us to film it, and it will also be better videos with more things happening in them, hopefully.
But I think we're both really happy doing this.
Yeah.
And we're not worn out. We work a lot and we work hard.
Yeah.
Especially you, like working a lot physically. But we still have that balance. We're finding the balance of taking time off, being with friends and families, and being just our family with Vera. So I think we have a good balance.
Yeah.
And it's definitely going to be easier now. We're going into spring and warmer temperatures. So we're looking forward to another warm season in the barn.
Yeah, so to wrap this up, of course we're missing cruising life, but this is another aspect of life that we also like a lot, that we have a home now, a fixed place.
And, a base.
And in the future, when the boat is finished and we're going out cruising again, we hope we can keep this place as a base here in Sweden, so we have something to come home to when we're home visiting family. And once we get there with this boat that we have built ourselves, that will be so fantastic to head out to cruise the world again in a boat that we have built with our own hands. That will be so cool.
It's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, but there's many hours we need to put in before we're there, so still some time.
Thank you for watching this episode, and we hope we cleared some of your thoughts, and just it's good to sit down every now and then and talk a little bit about what we've just done in the project. It's good for us too, and we can wrap things up and answer some of those questions that might have been, unclear. So see you next week again, and it's probably going to be a video with a lot of fairing and sanding.
Yes, another big face.
Bye.
Bye bye.